10 years ago, my life was turned entirely upside down. Not because I did anything wrong, but because my sister Sarah, the golden child, deemed me expendable. All because I had the nerve to figure out how to pay for college without our parents' help. My name is Marcus, and I was 18 when everything went apart. Sarah is 4 years older than me, and it was evident from the time we were kids who was the favorite. My parents, particularly my mother, treated Sarah as if she were God's gift to the world. If she scored an A on a test, they'd have a major celebration, complete with dinner, social media posts, and everything. But what about when I got straight A's? I'd be lucky to hear a "that's nice" before they shifted the conversation to whatever amazing thing Sarah was doing that week. Growing up in Sarah's shadow was not only difficult, but also soul-crushing. Everything I achieved was compared to her successes, and I constantly came up short. Not because I wasn't performing well, but because nothing could ever compare to Sarah's apparent perfection. When Sarah was accepted to Wharton for her MBA, you'd think she'd won the Nobel Prize. My parents depleted their savings to pay for her tuition, her fancy apartment in Philadelphia, her designer wardrobe, because obviously a future business executive needed to look the part. They even bought her a new car because, in their words, she needed reliable transportation for networking events. So when I got accepted into Oxford to study history, yeah, Oxford, not exactly a shabby school, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd finally get a fraction of the support. Spoiler, I didn't. "We can't afford your tuition," they claimed, which would have been understandable if they hadn't already spent a fortune on Sarah's education. What really got me was when they refused to co-sign a loan. I wasn't asking them to pay for everything, as they did with Sarah. All I needed was their signature to get better loan rates. But no, apparently they couldn't do that since they were thinking about their future and were planning to start a small business. That's when I turned to Aunt Rebecca. She's my father's older sister, and she's everything my parents are not. She is a successful neurosurgeon who has managed to maintain a fully grounded personality. My parents always had a strange tension with her. They'd be cordial at family events, but you could sense they were bitter about her success, especially my father. He despised being overshadowed by his older sister, which I subsequently discovered had had a greater impact on our family dynamic than I realized. I was afraid to seek Rebecca's assistance. I knew it would cause trouble if my folks found out I had gone to her, but I was desperate. I didn't want to lose my chance at Oxford, and with my parents unwilling to help, I was running out of choices. When I eventually summoned the guts to contact Rebecca, her response astounded me. There was no doubt, no judgment, just an immediate, "Of course I'll help. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" It seemed like the first time someone in my family had seen me respected my dreams as much as Sarah's. But I should have known Sarah wouldn't allow me to have even this minor win. Looking back, I see what it was all about. She couldn't bear the thought of me succeeding, even if it didn't affect her in any way. She'd spent so long being the family's star that the mere concept of me shining, even for a moment, was unthinkable. I had no clue at the time that my decision to approach Rebecca for aid would result in the full implosion of my family. What about Sarah? She was already calculating how to use this against me. And boy, did she succeed, at least for a while. Sometimes I wonder whether things would have been different if I had just given up on Oxford, remained home, and accepted my job as the family disappointment. But then I remember what Aunt Rebecca told me later. Some people will try to dim your light because they're afraid of being overshadowed. Don't let them. If only I'd known how prophetic those words would turn out to be. The night everything fell apart is burned into my memory like a bad scar that never quite heals. I'd been out with friends on a usual summer evening, attempting to enjoy my final few weeks before heading to Oxford. Everything seemed good as I left the house that morning. Maybe a little tense, but that was common in our household. When I arrived home at 9 p.m., the scene before me felt like something out of a horrible movie. My clothes, books, and Star Wars posters, which I'd owned since I was 12, were all packed in boxes and thrown across the foyer. Even my bedding was stripped and folded in a nice pile, as if they were wiping any evidence of my existence from the house. My parents were sitting in the living room, and there was Sarah, standing by the fireplace with this expression on her face that I'll never forget. It was not simply smug satisfaction, it was triumph. She'd finally figured out how to get rid of her annoying little brother who dared to emerge out of her shadow. "Explain this!" Dad shouted, slamming a stack of papers at me. They were scattered on the floor beneath my feet, and when I bent to pick them up, my blood ran cold. They were emails, or what appeared to be emails, between me and Aunt Rebecca. But there was something wrong with them. The terminology was incorrect, the tone was inappropriate, and the material was excessive. She had somehow gained access to my laptop. I subsequently realized I had made the rookie mistake of leaving it unlocked while eating lunch one day, and discovered my correspondence with Rebecca concerning college fees. Instead of simply revealing this, she went above and beyond. She'd prepared bogus emails that made it appear as if I was selling knowledge about our parents' forthcoming business endeavor in exchange for Rebecca's financial assistance. "These aren't real," I remarked, my voice quivering as I scanned through the doctored texts. "These are fake. Sarah made them up." However, Sarah had already poisoned the well. She'd spent the last few days spinning her yarn, preying on our parents' concerns about Aunt Rebecca's success and their fear of their confidential business plans being exposed. By the time I stepped in that night, they were already persuaded of my betrayal. "We trusted you," Mom remarked, her voice icy. "We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us?" That almost made me chuckle. "You gave me everything?" They had given Sarah everything. They'd given me scraps and called it generosity. "Mom, please," I reasoned with her. "Think about this. Why would I need to tell Aunt Rebecca anything about the business? She's helping me with tuition because she wants to, not because—" "So you admit she's helping you?" Dad responded with a reddened face. "After we specifically told you we couldn't afford to support your education right now?" "Because you spent all your money on Sarah," I then snapped. "You paid for her entire education, her apartment, her car, everything. But when I ask for help with loans, not even full tuition, just loans, you suddenly can't afford it." Sarah moved forward, flawlessly playing her role. "This isn't about me," she stated calmly, as if she were the voice of reason. "This is about you betraying our parents' trust, going behind their backs to Aunt Rebecca, telling her things about the business." "Things I don't even know about," I blurted out. "How could I leak information about a business I know nothing about? You never tell me anything." But they weren't listening. They had already made up their minds. The golden child had spoken, and her words became gospel in our household. It didn't matter if the emails were clearly fraudulent or that the entire story made no sense. Sarah had given them precisely what they wanted, a cause to justify their favoritism, a chance to portray me as the ungrateful, scheming child they'd always assumed I was. "Get out," Dad murmured calmly, which was almost worse than yelling it. "Pack your belongings and leave this house." "Dad, please," I begged one final time. "Just think about this. Call Aunt Rebecca. Ask her yourself." "Get out!" he yelled, jumping up so fast that his chair slid backward. I looked at Mom, hoping to detect some doubt, some hesitation. But she just sat there, staring at her hands as if they were the most fascinating objects in the world. And Sarah? Sarah was nearly shining with delight, and I knew it was over. There would be no convincing them or giving my side of the tale. Sarah had triumphed, as she always did. The flawless daughter had successfully eradicated the family disappointment. I took what I could carry, some clothes, my laptop, and vital documents, and left the rest. As I walked out the door, I heard Sarah's quiet voice behind me. "I hope you learned your lesson about loyalty." I did not look around. I did not give her the pleasure of seeing tears in my eyes. I simply walked to my car, tossed my belongings in the back seat, and drove to the only person I knew would believe me, Aunt Rebecca. Looking back, I see that night wasn't only about Sarah's envy or my parents' partiality. It was all about power. Sarah's power over our parents, their perceived power over me, and the power I discovered when I walked away from it all. But at the moment, all I knew was that my sister had just destroyed my life, and my parents had assisted her in doing so. Standing on Aunt Rebecca's doorstep at nearly midnight, clutching what was left of my life in a few hurriedly packed bags, I felt completely disoriented. I had no idea if she'd be awake, but I didn't have anywhere else to go. When she opened the door, still in her scrubs from a late hospital shift, one look at my face told her everything she needed to know. "Oh, Marcus," she whispered quietly, embracing me into an embrace. There are no questions or judgments, only unconditional support. It was something I'd never felt at home, and it almost shattered me. Rebecca's house was everything our family home wasn't: warm, friendly, and absolutely unpretentious, despite her success. She put me up in her guest room, got me some tea, and just sat with me as I attempted to digest what had happened. She didn't force me to communicate and didn't try to cure things right away. I was there. The first night was surreal. Lying in a foreign bed, staring at unfamiliar walls, I kept expecting to wake up and realize it was all a bad dream. But morning arrived, and reality remained unchanged. I was still kicked out, betrayed, and trying to figure out how my life had utterly disintegrated. Over the next few days, Rebecca and I settled into a rhythm. Rebecca would get up early for her hospital rounds, leave me breakfast, always with a little encouraging note, and return home in the evening to find me either studying for Oxford or staring into space, trying to make sense of everything. It wasn't until one of our evening conversations that Rebecca finally filled in the missing pieces of our family puzzle. She had just returned home from a particularly lengthy surgery, and we were sitting in her kitchen, having takeout Chinese food. "You know," she continued, twisting lo mein around her fork, "your father's always had this complex about success." I looked up, intrigued. Rebecca rarely talked about Dad, and when she did, it was generally just superficial things. "What do you mean?" she groaned, setting down her fork. "It started long before you were born. When we were kids, I was always the one who—" She hesitated, carefully choosing her words. "Let's say I was the Sarah of our generation." That piqued my interest. "You mean Dad was like me?" "In some ways," she agreed. "I was the older sibling who seemed to do everything right. Good grades, medical school, marriage to a wonderful man, though I lost James far too young. Your father, he struggled with living in my shadow. He was smart, capable, but he always felt like he was being compared to me." She took a sip of her wine before continuing. "When I became a surgeon and started making real money, your dad couldn't handle it. He stopped coming to family events unless he had to and stopped returning my calls. Then he met your mom, and things got even worse." "Mom never liked you much," I said, remembering all the subtle digs, the barely hidden contempt. "Your mom came from a family where appearances meant everything. When she realized your dad's sister was more successful than him," Rebecca shrugged, "well, let's just say it didn't fit her narrative of how things should be." "And then Sarah came along," I interjected, noticing a pattern. "Yes," Rebecca nodded. "Sarah was their chance to create their own success story. They poured everything into her, their money, their attention, their dreams, and you." "I was the backup plan," I finished angrily. "No, Marcus." She reached across the table and gripped my hand. "You were the one they couldn't control, the one who reminded them too much of the parts of themselves they didn't want to face." It was as if a light bulb went off in my head. All those years of feeling inadequate, as if I could never measure up, were not about me. It was about my parents' fears and their desperate need to show something to the world through Sarah. "Why didn't you ever tell me this before?" I inquired. Rebecca's eyes were sorrowful. "I didn't want to make things harder for you. I thought if I kept my distance, I would maintain the peace. But I was wrong. I should have been there more. I should have helped you understand why things were the way they were." "You're helping now," I murmured quietly. She grinned, but her face was stained by sentimental guilt. "You know, the irony is that Sarah's exactly what they wanted, but she's also their biggest weakness. They've enabled her so much that she doesn't know how to handle not getting her way. That's why she went to such extremes to get rid of you. You were becoming a threat to her position. Because I dared to try and go to Oxford? I still couldn't wrap my head around it. Because you dared to be independent," Rebecca corrected. "Because you found a way to succeed without them, and that scared them. It showed them they couldn't control you anymore." We sat in silence for a long time after that. allowing the weight of these disclosures to sink in. Rebecca finally spoke again, her voice firm. "Marcus, I want you to know something. What they did, believing Sarah's lies and kicking you out, that's on them, not you. You did nothing wrong by trying to build a better life for yourself." For the first time since that night, I felt tears well up in my eyes. I keep waiting for them to call, to realize what they did. Rebecca grabbed my fingers again. "Don't wait for them, honey. Live your life. Show them what they lost by choosing Sarah's lies over your truth." That night, lying in bed, I reflected on all Rebecca had told me. About Dad's jealousy, Mom's fixation with appearances, and Sarah's frantic need to be the focus of attention. For the first time, I saw them not as the beautiful family they seemed to be, but as deeply flawed individuals whose own anxieties had ruined their relationship with their kid. It didn't take away the pain, but it helped me understand. And as it turned out, comprehending was the first step toward healing. Life has a strange way of continuing onward, even when it appears that everything has stopped. The weeks became months, and before I knew it, I was on a plane to Oxford. Aunt Rebecca took me to the airport, and as we stood at the security checkpoint, she held me closer than anybody had before. "You're going to do amazing things, Marcus," she murmured, her voice heavy with passion. "Don't let anyone dim your light." It was the first time anyone in my family had shown genuine pride in me, and it impacted me more than I expected. I barely made it on board the plane before tears flowed. My parents' quiet throughout my first few months at Oxford was deafening. No calls, texts, or emails to see if I was still alive. The instant I stepped out their door, I felt as if I had vanished. Sarah wrote me a text about a month after I left saying, "Hope you're doing okay. BTW, you really should password protect your laptop." The statement made me angry. She was no longer trying to hide what she had done. Instead, she was bragging about it. I banned her number without responding. She did not deserve the gratification of knowing she had reached me. Oxford was like entering another world. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Sarah's little brother or the disappointing son. I was simply Marcus, an American history student with a penchant for medieval combat and a fair ability to make people laugh. I found friends who didn't know about my baggage and simply liked me for who I was. It felt liberated. I pushed myself into my studies, anxious to show that I deserved to be there. My lecturers seemed to enjoy my zeal, and I gradually began to establish a life separate from the drama in my family. Every victory seemed like a small rebellion against everyone who had questioned me. Aunt Rebecca was my link back home. We'd video chat every weekend, and she'd keep me up to date on her life while avoiding any mention of my parents or Sarah until I specifically asked. She knew that I needed time away from it all to heal and grow on my own terms. Then, approximately 2 years into my program, just as I was truly getting my footing, my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in far too long. "Mom." I looked at the computer for what seemed like hours, my heart beating. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep the wall of silence they had erected, but a lesser, more sensitive part of me continued to hope for something. An apology? An acknowledgement? I wasn't sure. When I eventually answered, the conversation seemed strange. "Hello?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. There was a pause, then, "Hi, it's your mother." As if I didn't recognize her voice. As if we were casual acquaintances who hadn't spoken in a while, rather than a mother who had watched her husband toss her son out and done nothing to stop it. "What do you want?" I inquired, maintaining a neutral tone. Another pause. "We need to talk." The way she said it, as if she had been mistreated and I owed her my time after 2 years of silence, made something inside me break. "Now you want to talk?" I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. 2 years of nothing, and now you need to talk? Your father and I, we want to see you." I expected more. An explanation, an apology, something. Instead, I received the following. "We've been going through a difficult time. The business. They did not want to see me because they missed me or regretted their actions. They needed something. The business, the one they'd accused me of betraying, was probably in trouble, and that was supposed to be my problem." "Let me guess," I cut her off. Sarah messed something up? The silence on the other end was enough to answer. "We're still your family," she said finally, her voice sharp. "You owe us at least that much." That made me giggle. "I don't owe you anything. You kicked me out, remember? Believed Sarah's lies without even giving me a chance to explain? Ring any bells?" "We made mistakes," she confessed, but her tone indicated she didn't truly believe it. "But we're your parents. We need you." "No," I answered firmly. "You need something from me. There's a difference. If you needed me, you would have called 2 years ago. You would have checked if I was okay. You would have asked Aunt Rebecca how I was doing. But you didn't. You only called because you want something." "That's not fair," she protested. But we both knew I was right. "If you need help, go ask Sarah," I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. "She's your golden child, remember? I'm sure she'll figure something out." I hung up before she could speak, my hands shaking but my thoughts clear. For the first time since everything happened, I felt completely liberated. They couldn't hurt me anymore unless I allowed them. I called Aunt Rebecca right away, desperate to hear from someone who genuinely cared. When I informed her of the call, she was not surprised. "They always come back when they need something," she murmured softly. "The question is, are you ready to let them back in?" I considered it for a second. "No," I replied finally. "I don't think I am." And for once, I didn't feel bad about putting myself first. When I hung up with Mom, I assumed that was the end of it. I should have known better. When my mother fails, Sarah constantly steps in to fix things. But this time, her regular techniques were not going to work. I had just finished my degree at Oxford and landed a terrific job back in the States. Life was good. I had my own apartment, a job I liked, and most importantly, quiet. Then Sarah stepped up at my door, and I almost didn't recognize her. The perfectly polished sister that I remembered seemed different. Her luxury clothing was less clean, her characteristic confident grin was forced, and there was a hint of desperation in her eyes that I had never seen before. "Hey, little brother," she murmured, attempting to sound casual. "It's been a while." I paused in the doorway, not inviting her inside. "What do you want, Sarah?" She startled slightly at my tone, but soon recovered. "Can't a sister visit her brother? You look good, by the way. Oxford clearly agreed with you." "Cut the act," I responded with my arms out. "You haven't cared about my appearance for the past 10 years. Why are you here?" Her smile faded. "Can we talk inside, please?" I should have declined. I should have shut the door in her face as she deserved. But curiosity got the best of me. I wanted to know what possible reason she had for what she'd done. "Fine," I stepped aside, "but make it quick." She went in, glancing around my place with apparent amazement. "Wow, this is nice. Really nice." "Yeah, turns out you can do pretty well when you're not sabotaging other people's lives," I observed dryly. Sarah had the decency to appear uneasy. "About that," she began, but halted. "Look, I know things got complicated back then." "Complicated?" I couldn't stop laughing. "You faked emails to make it look like I was betraying our parents. You got me kicked out of the house. You destroyed my relationship with Mom and Dad. That's not complicated, Sarah. That's calculated cruelty." "I overreacted," she admitted, though her tone suggested she didn't really believe she'd done anything wrong. "But I'm here because I want to make things right." "Really?" I asked. "And this sudden desire to make amends has nothing to do with whatever's going wrong with Mom and Dad's business?" Her expression stiffened. "The business? It's not good, Marcus. The pandemic hit us hard, and I've been trying to keep things afloat, but you're not as brilliant at business management as everyone thought you'd be?" "I finished for her. That's not fair," she snapped, displaying the first real emotion since she'd arrived. "I've been doing everything I can." "Like you did everything you could to ruin my life?" I replied. "Yes." "Tell me, Sarah, was it worth it? Did destroying your brother's relationship with his parents make you feel better about yourself?" She jumped up and paced my living room. "You don't understand. I was trying to protect the family." "No," I snapped at her. "You were trying to protect your position as the golden child. You couldn't stand the idea of me succeeding on my own, of me finding a way without Mom and Dad's help. It threatened your whole identity as the perfect daughter." "That's not," she started. But I wasn't finished. You want to know what's really sad, Sarah? I never wanted to compete with you. I just wanted to live my own life, go to school, and make my own way. But you were so insecure, so afraid of losing your spot. And now, I continued, now that everything's falling apart, now that you've proven you're not the business genius everyone thought you were, you think you can come here and what? Ask for my help? Expect me to forget everything you did? We're family, she said weakly. No, I shook my head. We stopped being family the day you chose to betray me, the day you smiled while watching our parents throw me out, the day you texted me to brag about hacking my laptop. She gasped at that last one. I was angry, she attempted to explain. You were going to Oxford, getting help from Aunt Rebecca, getting what you couldn't control, I said to her. That's what really bothered you, isn't it? That I found a way to succeed without going through you or Mom and Dad. Sarah sunk back onto my couch, deflated. The business is going to fail, she said quietly. Everything Mom and Dad worked for. Everything they sacrificed me for, you mean? I couldn't keep my bitterness from coming through. Well, I guess that's what happens when you put all your eggs in one basket. Sometimes the basket breaks. Please. She looked up at me, and I saw real dread in her eyes for the first time. We need your help. You're doing well. You could— No, I answered firmly, rising up. I'm not bailing you out. You made your choices, Sarah. Now you get to live with them. You're really going to let Mom and Dad lose everything? She asked, a hint of her old manipulation creeping back into her voice. They chose to believe your lies. They chose to throw me out. They chose you, Sarah. Every single time, they chose you. So yes, I'm going to let them face the consequences of those choices. She stared at me for a long moment, as if she were seeing me for the first time. Perhaps she was. The young brother she could manipulate and dominate vanished, replaced by someone who could see through her deception. You've changed, she finally murmured. No, I corrected. I just stopped letting you define who I am. She left soon after, her immaculate veneer completely shattered. As I watched her walk to her car, no longer the flashy BMW she used to drive, but a modest Honda, I felt no delight in her demise. Just a peaceful assurance that I'd finally gotten out of her shadow. Later that night, Aunt Rebecca called. Sarah came to see you? She inquired, concerned in her tone. Yeah, I groaned. Tried to guilt me into helping with the business. And I said no, she replied. It felt good. Right. I'm proud of you, she added softly. It's not easy standing your ground against family. They're not my family anymore, I realized as I said it. You are. The quiet on the other end informed me she understood exactly what I meant. Some may believe I'm being harsh by refusing to aid my family when they're struggling. However, they were not present when I was hurting and needed them the most. They made their decision years ago. They can now live with it, just as Sarah does with hers.